There is a version of you that nobody has ever fully seen. Not the version that shows up to work, that responds to messages, that knows how to read a room and adjust accordingly. That version people see all the time. That version is practiced and fluent, and very good at what it does. I am talking about the version underneath that one. The version that is still running long after the conversation ended. That is still in the parking lot, mentally, while your body is already 3 hours and 2 zip codes away. You know the feeling. Someone said something 1 sentence, maybe 2, and for the next 3 hours you were not fully present in your own life. You were there physically, nodding, responding, going through the motions. But the actual you was somewhere else entirely, running the moment on a loop, rehearsing what you should have said, calculating what they meant, building a case in your own head for a trial no one else was attending. 1 sentence, 3 hours of your life. Or this one. Someone whose opinion, if you are being honest, should carry almost no weight, a coworker you do not particularly respect, an ex who does not know you anymore, a stranger on the internet who will not remember your name by tomorrow, said something critical, and you carried it. Not for an afternoon, for days. Adjusting how you presented yourself in the next meeting, second-guessing a decision you had already made. Shrinking, almost imperceptibly, in exactly the direction their comment pushed. Or this. You are in a conversation, and you become aware the way you always become aware, because you are always monitoring that the other person is slightly cooler than they were last week. No explanation, no direct statement, just a fractional shift in temperature. And within seconds, some part of you begins the work of figuring out what you did, what you should fix, how to close the gap. You have been doing this for so long that you do not notice it anymore. You just notice the cost, the fatigue that does not have an obvious cause, the way certain interactions leave you feeling like you handed something over that you did not agree to give. The sense, at the end of some days, of having been subtly managed and not knowing exactly when it happened, or who did it, or whether you are even imagining it. You are not imagining it. And here is the thing nobody tells you. The problem is not that people are trying to affect you. Some of them are. Most of them are doing it without even realizing it. The problem is that you have never been given the actual operating principles, the ones that change how you move through every room, every conversation, every situation where someone is trying to take the wheel from you. That is what the next several minutes are about. Most of what you have been taught about strength has it exactly backwards. You were taught that strength means responding, that silence is weakness, that if you do not defend yourself, you are letting them win, that the person who always has an answer is the one with power, that standing your ground means making sure people know you cannot be walked over. And so you have spent years, maybe a decade or more, doing exactly that. Firing back when you felt attacked. Explaining yourself to people who had already decided what they thought. Staying up until 1 a.m., mentally constructing arguments against things people said at 9 a.m. Spending real, irreplaceable hours of your one life on people and situations that were never worth the investment. Every time you reacted to something that did not deserve a reaction, you gave it something it had not earned. Your energy. Every time you bent over backwards explaining yourself to someone who was not listening, you surrendered something more valuable than you realized, the signal that you can be reached. Every time you lost 3 hours to 1 sentence, you handed the person who said that sentence something they probably forgot they ever threw at you. That ends today. What I am going to walk you through are 7 psychological laws, principles that the most strategically intelligent people across history have understood and applied, and that the world around you has a significant interest in keeping you from discovering. Not because they are dangerous, but because a person who has internalized these 7 principles is a fundamentally different player in every arena they move through. Not colder, not more defensive, not distant or closed off, just genuinely, structurally impossible to destabilize. Law 1. Attention is the only currency that matters. Most people believe their most valuable resource is time. But time without attention is empty. You can have every hour in the world and still accomplish nothing, feel nothing, build nothing if your attention is scattered, captured, hijacked by a dozen different inputs that never asked permission to take it. Here is what nobody taught you in school, in any self-improvement book, in any conversation you have had about success. Attention is power, not metaphorically, literally and mechanically. Wherever focused human attention goes, influence follows. When you give someone your attention, your genuine, unambiguous, focused attention, you elevate them. You confirm that they register in your world. You make them real in a way that indifference does not. This is why being ignored by someone you want to impress feels worse than being criticized. Criticism requires attention. Indifference requires none. And at some level, everyone understands that the deepest statement another person can make about your significance is not what they say about you. It is whether you register in their field at all. Strategically intelligent people understand this with a precision most people never develop. They treat their attention the way a serious investor treats capital, not throwing it at everything that presents itself, not spreading it thin across every situation that generates noise, not allowing social obligation, guilt, or the fear of seeming rude to determine where their focus goes. They are selective, ruthlessly, deliberately, and without apology selective. And because of that selectivity, when they do focus on you, when they do engage, respond, acknowledge, it lands with a weight that indiscriminate attention never produces. Their attention means something, which means they mean something. That weight is not charisma. It is the accumulated signal of someone who has never diluted their presence by giving it to things that did not deserve it. The shift that changes everything is a shift in the question you ask. Before every response, every engagement, every decision to spend emotional energy on something that arrived in your life, stop. Ask one question. Not, should I respond? Not, will they think I am rude? Just this, cleanly and honestly. What is the return on this investment of my attention? If you follow that question without flinching, you will discover that the answer is often nothing. Less than nothing. Because you have been paying a real cost for zero return. The argument you almost had. The explanation you spent 20 minutes composing. The situation you allowed to live rent-free in your head for 72 hours. None of it produced anything. It only depleted you. The people who have built real psychological power in their lives are not the ones who responded to everything. They are the ones who built a filter and protected it. Think about the people you have known who seemed to carry genuine authority in every room they entered, not because of their title or their volume or their willingness to dominate a conversation, but because of something harder to name. A quality of presence that made you feel, when they gave you their attention, that something real was happening. That you were seen in a way that mattered. That quality is not an accident of personality. It is the product of scarcity. Every one of those people, if you study them closely enough, shares one characteristic. They have a filter, and they protect it. Not every situation gets their energy. Not every provocation gets their response. Not every person who reaches for them actually gets them. And the accumulation of that, the signal, built up over years of consistent selective engagement, is what produces the gravitational pull you felt in their presence. You are building that now, one filtered moment at a time. Law 2. Silence is domination. Silence is not backing down. Silence is the highest form of control. We live inside a culture that has weaponized noise. The loudest voice gets the platform. The person who always has a comeback is called quick-witted. The one who never backs down from a verbal exchange is called strong. And somewhere along the way, most people absorbed a belief so deep they have never examined it, that silence equals weakness, that if you do not respond, you are losing. I need you to understand how completely wrong this is, because this belief has cost you more than almost anything else. When someone attacks you and you fire back, what have you actually done? You have confirmed 3 things simultaneously. First, their words found a target. Second, they have the ability to activate you. Third, they now know exactly which inputs produce which outputs in you. They have your map, and the next time they want to move you, they have a method. Marcus Aurelius, who governed the most powerful empire on earth while being attacked from every direction, politically and personally, wrote in his private journals something he never meant for anyone to read, that he considered the ability to receive a provocation without responding to it one of the highest exercises of human discipline. Not because response was beneath him, but because he understood that the moment you respond to something beneath you, you have descended to its level. And descending to its level is the only way it can win. Here is the psychological mechanism that makes silence so disorienting for an attacker. The human brain is wired around anticipation and response. Every provocation, every sharp word, every passive implication, every jab delivered with a smile is a loop waiting to close. When you react the expected way, it closes. The other person receives the signal they were generating toward. They learn. This input produces this output. They file that away, and they will use it again. When you do not react, when the loop stays open, the attacker's brain is left running the same sequence without the resolution it expected. It turns inward, searches for closure that never comes. That is not a side effect. That is the entire mechanism, and it costs you nothing. There is one more dimension to strategic silence that almost nobody talks about. Every time you explain yourself to someone who was not honestly asking, every time you justify, qualify, rush to correct the impression you are not protecting your reputation. You are providing a map of your vulnerabilities, a window into what you need people to believe about you, a demonstration of exactly which accusations you cannot sit with. The strategically intelligent person has learned something that takes real time to internalize. You do not owe anyone an explanation that was not honestly requested, and the impulse to give one anyway is not generosity. It is a tell. Law 3. Scarcity creates gravity. Make your presence something that has to be earned. Human beings are wired at a level that predates civilization to value what is rare and discount what is abundant. This is not a cultural artifact. It is not something we chose. It is baked into how the brain assigns weight to things. Scarcity signals value. Abundance signals disposability. And it operates on you and on how people perceive you, whether you are aware of it or not. Here is the version of this that most people miss entirely, because they apply it to products, to money, to physical things, but never to themselves. To their own time, presence, availability, and attention. Think of someone in your life, a friend, a relationship, a colleague who was always there, immediately responsive, always available, always willing to reorganize around your needs, whose attention at any given moment you could access without cost. Now ask yourself honestly, how did you come to feel about that person over time? Not in the beginning. In the beginning, constant availability can feel like warmth, like devotion. But in the months and years that followed, did their presence feel like a gift? Or did it become ambient? Something you stopped noticing because the cost of accessing it was zero, and we do not notice what costs us nothing. Contrast that with someone whose attention you were not certain you would get. Someone who showed up fully when they showed up, but who you could not assume. Someone whose availability felt limited, not because they were playing games, but because they were genuinely occupied with something real. How did you feel about the time you did get with that person? You valued it. Because it was not guaranteed. Because something in you, the same architecture that values rare over abundant, registered that their presence had a cost attached to it, and calibrated accordingly. The principle extends beyond time into something more fundamental. People do not value what they have automatic access to. Full stop. This is not cynical. It is structural. And the moment you understand it clearly, you stop taking it personally when the people who have unrestricted access to you treat that access carelessly. They are not failing to appreciate you. They are operating exactly as the wiring predicts. The concrete version of this is simpler than it sounds. Stop answering every message within minutes, not as a tactic, but because if your time genuinely has value, your response time will naturally reflect that. The person who responds to everything instantly, at all hours, is broadcasting a message they almost certainly do not intend. That there is nothing important enough in their life to make them briefly unavailable. Stop reorganizing your schedule every time someone needs something. Your momentum is an asset. Treating it as infinitely interruptible tells everyone around you, and more importantly tells you, that it is not serious. Stop being everywhere for everyone. The person who is everyone's resource is not powerful. They are exhausted. And exhausted people do not build anything that lasts. The version of you that other people feel as significant, whose arrival means something, whose attention is worth competing for, is not the version that was always there. It is the version that, when it shows up completely, and whose showing up, because it was not guaranteed, meant something. Law 4. Non-reaction. Is the move. Your non-reaction is the most powerful statement you can make. Every provocation, every insult, every passive implication, every social jab is an attempt to take the steering wheel from you. The person provoking you wants to determine your emotional state. They want to make you angry, defensive, flustered, or embarrassed. And the moment you react the way they intended, they have succeeded. You handed them control. Non-reaction is not passive. It is a statement. One that says, with more precision than any words could, you do not have grip on me. Your attempt did not find purchase. You are not in my world the way you wanted to be. But there is a version of non-reaction that fails, and a version that works, and understanding the difference is the entire game. The version that fails, suppression. White-knuckling it, feeling the full emotional impact, letting it churn inside, just not showing it externally. This is exhausting, unsustainable, and most people can read it anyway. The jaw is slightly tighter. The response is slightly too delayed. The performance of composure is visible precisely because it is a performance. The version that works, genuine indifference, produced by genuine perspective. When you understand clearly what is actually happening, when you can see the attempt for what it is, trace it back to its source, recognize it as a report on the other person's state. Rather than information about yours, the reaction simply does not come. Not because you suppressed it, because there was nothing to suppress. This is what Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who began his life as a literal slave and became one of the most quoted thinkers in history, spent his entire work pointing toward. He made one central distinction that, once understood, reorganizes everything. The distinction between what is in your control and what is not. What other people say about you, not in your control. What they decide to think, not in your control. Whether they approve of your choices, not in your control. How they choose to interpret your silence, your tone, your decisions, not in your control. Your judgment about what those things mean. Your decision about how much authority they carry. Your choice, moment by moment, about whether to treat someone else's behavior as information that requires a response or as weather that is simply passing through. That is entirely in your control. And it is the only domain that matters. The practical version is not a technique. It is a question you learn to ask faster and faster until it becomes automatic. Is this a report about me or a report about them? That question, held honestly for even 3 seconds, is all the distance you need, because genuine non-reaction does not feel like holding back. It feels like looking at the situation from somewhere so far above it that the provocation looks exactly like what it is, small. And from that height, you do not need to respond, not because you are strong enough to resist, but because there is simply nothing there worth the motion. There is a deeper reason this law matters beyond the tactical, and it is worth naming. Most people, when they react, when they fire back, when they rush to defend, when they explain themselves under pressure, are not responding to the present situation. They are responding to the first time something like this situation happened. To a younger version of themselves, in a context where the stakes were genuinely higher, where the other person's approval or disapproval actually had consequences, where not responding was not an option. That earlier context is gone. But the nervous system did not update when it left. It is still running the old protocol, still treating adult social friction as if it carried the weight of the original wound. Genuine non-reaction, the kind that does not require effort because it comes from actual perspective, rather than trained suppression, becomes available when you can see this clearly. When you understand that the activation you are feeling is not actually about this room, this person, this moment. It is a memory firing. And memories, unlike present threats, do not require you to do anything. You can simply let them move through. Law 5. Cut clean, cut once. Not everyone in your life deserves to be there, and the cost of keeping the wrong people is not neutral. This is one of the most uncomfortable laws to sit with, because it requires you to look at relationships you have often spent years tending and ask, honestly, whether the tending is producing anything worth the cost. But it is also the one that changes the texture of daily life most immediately when you act on it. There are 3 types of people who need to be removed from your proximity: Not with drama, not with a confrontation, not with a speech about what they did and why you are done. Just quietly, permanently, and without providing explanation to anyone who was not honest enough to deserve one. The first type. The person who is actively working against you while occupying the position of ally, peer, or friend. Not someone who disagrees with you, not someone who challenges you. The person who routs for your failure, who is reliably present at your stumbles and reliably absent at your wins, who has positioned themselves close enough to collect information about your vulnerabilities, and who uses that information, usually without explicit awareness of doing it, to keep you from getting too far ahead of where they are comfortable seeing you. The temptation with this person is to expose them, to call them out, to prove what they are doing, to make sure people know the truth about them. Resist this entirely. Engagement validates. It gives them a platform. It transforms them from someone in your peripheral vision into someone your entire field of energy is organized around defeating. And it pulls you down to a level where fighting the battle consumes everything you would have spent on winning. The move is elimination, not confrontation. Quiet, complete, and unexplained. No announcement, no final conversation, no satisfying scene where you lay out exactly what you know. Just gone. Your continued success, built without reference to them, is the only response that cannot be argued with. The second type, the chronic critic. The person who has never put their name on something that could fail, and who redirects that unlived potential into commentary on what you build. The only thing worth understanding about criticism from this place is structural. It contains no information about your work. It is a report about the critic's relationship with their own unrealized potential, delivered in the grammatical form of a statement about you. You do not argue with it. You do not address it. You simply continue and let the accumulation of what you build make the commentary increasingly irrelevant. The third type is the most painful to see clearly, because it usually wears the face of love. The energy drain. The person who is genuinely struggling and whose pain is real and your care for them is genuine, but who has, over time, organized that struggle around access to your emotional labor. There is always a crisis. The crises do not resolve, not fully, not for long, because resolution would change the terms of the relationship. And something in the dynamic requires those terms to stay as they are. The hardest thing to see clearly is this. Your own growing stability can become threatening to them, not because they wish you harm, but because your groundedness carries an implied message that the chaos is not inevitable, and they need it to feel inevitable. Protecting your energy from this person is not abandonment. It is not evidence that you do not care. It is the recognition that you cannot pour indefinitely from a vessel that is never refilled, and that the people who actually deserve your best self are being deprived of it because you are chronically emptied by someone who is not using what you give them to build anything. Law 6. Emotional sovereignty. Build the interior architecture that nothing on the outside can reach. The reason people can get under your skin, can activate you, control your mood, knock you off your game is not that they are powerful. It is structural. Your emotional state, as it currently operates, is organized around external inputs. Something happens out there, and something shifts in here. Automatically, without your permission, without your even deciding to let it happen. A cool email and the afternoon dims. A compliment and something lifts briefly, until the need for the next one sets in. A silence where there should be acknowledgement and a background calculation starts running. Is something wrong? Did you do something? What did you miss? This is what psychologists call emotional reactivity. And the distinguishing feature is not that you feel things feeling things is appropriate, it is what being human is. The distinguishing feature is that your feelings are not generated from inside you, they are imported. Your interior weather is determined by a continuous stream of external inputs that you are not currently filtering or governing, which means anyone who understands how those inputs work, anyone who has learned through proximity and attention that a specific kind of silence or a specific kind of comment will produce a predictable shift in your state has, functionally, administrative access to your emotional system. The most manipulative people in your life are not operating from genius. They have simply learned your inputs. They know which levers produce which responses. And they use that knowledge the way you use a familiar machine, without particularly thinking about it. Emotional sovereignty does not mean feeling less. It does not mean becoming cold or performing detachment. It means moving the governance of your emotional state from the outside to the inside. External events continue to happen. People continue to say things. Situations continue to shift. But those events no longer have automatic, unrestricted access to your interior. There are two practices that build this over time. The first, identify your specific triggers with precision. Not categories, conflict bothers me, or I care what people think. Those are useless for this work. Specific triggers. What is the exact phrase that makes you defensive? What specific type of silence from what specific type of person starts the loop? What scenario makes you feel, against your better judgment, that you need to justify yourself? Map your vulnerabilities with the same non-judgment you would bring to mapping terrain you needed to navigate. Not to be ashamed of them, to stop being surprised by them. Because a trigger you can see coming has already lost most of its power. The second, practice holding the activation without acting on it, not suppressing holding. Feeling it arrive and staying with it long enough to ask, is the source of this carrying actual information about who I am or information about who they are and what they are managing? The deeper version of sovereignty, the one that is harder to build and more durable once built, goes beyond managing specific triggers. It is about developing a relationship with your own interior life that is real enough and inhabited enough that other people's attempts to determine your state simply do not find the purchase they are looking for. When you know not believe, not hope, but know in the way you know things that have been tested, that your judgment is sound, that your direction is right, that the work you are doing is worth doing, external commentary about all of those things becomes, naturally and without effort, significantly less activating. Not because you have become closed to feedback, but because you have a ground that incoming information gets measured against rather than simply absorbed. Most people do not have that ground. They have accumulated opinions of themselves gathered from other people's reactions, from early experiences, but they do not have bedrock. They have history, not foundation. Building bedrock takes time. It requires the accumulation of real evidence, not reassurance, not affirmations, but actual evidence produced by you, that you can do the things you are trying to do, that your judgment, when you trust it, tends to be sound, that you can move through difficulty without it destroying you. No one can hand you that evidence. It is produced only through the private, often unseen work of continuing to show up for what matters to you, especially when no one is watching, and especially when the external signals are not cooperating. But once you have even the beginning of it, you become, in a very specific sense, harder to reach. Not because you have built a wall, because you have built a ground. And people who are standing on ground do not fall when other people push. Law 7. Win without moving. The highest form of power is knowing when not to act. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War that supreme excellence is not to win 100 battles. It is to resolve conflict without fighting. He was not describing avoidance. He was describing a level of strategic intelligence so complete that the need to fight rarely arises, because the person operating at that level has already won in every way that actually matters before the battle is joined. We have been conditioned to believe that power looks like action, that winning means fighting, that if you are not constantly responding, defending, and proving, you are falling behind. And this conditioning serves the interests of everyone who benefits from you being reactive, scattered, and perpetually engaged in battles that were never worth your time. The discipline I am describing, strategic inaction, the deliberate decision not to act when acting would cost more than staying still, is possibly the hardest thing in this entire conversation. Because it requires you to sit inside urgency without answering it, to feel the pull toward response and not follow it, to watch a situation that is asking for your energy and make the considered, intentional decision to withhold it. Here is the practical test that separates situations requiring your intervention from situations that will resolve without you. Ask, if I do nothing here for 72 hours, what actually happens? Not what feels like it will happen. Not the story your nervous system is running about what the silence will mean. What actually, materially happens? The answer, more often than you expect, is the situation changes on its own. The conflict loses momentum. The person demanding your response loses interest. The narrative that felt urgent becomes irrelevant. Things resolve through their own logic, without your energy accelerating them in either direction. Here is the concrete example. Someone is spreading a story about you. Every instinct mobilizes, get in front of it, correct the record, reach out to the people who might have heard it before they decide what to think. And in doing all of that, you accomplish several things, most of them the opposite of what you intended. You confirm the story found you. You grant it the significance of your response. You spend enormous energy managing a narrative you do not fully control, energy that comes directly from what you were building before this started. The alternative? Continue. Your continued becoming is a more complete answer than anything you could say. The people who know you will continue to know you. The people who chose the story over the observable reality of who you are were not in your corner to begin with. There is a second application worth understanding clearly. Competition. When someone positions themselves as your rival, when they begin organizing their movement in explicit response to yours, the reactive instinct is to engage, to adjust your strategy in response to their adjustments, to stay ahead of what they are doing. The moment you do this, you lose something more significant than any competitive advantage you might gain. You let them set the terms of the race. Your direction is now organized around their direction. You are no longer moving toward something. You are moving away from them. And those are not the same thing. The person who is genuinely, durably ahead in any field is almost never the person who knew where their competition was. They were too occupied with what they were building to track it. The people who carry genuine gravity, whose presence reorganizes a room not through performance, but through something harder to name, are not people who respond to everything. They move at their own pace. They give their attention to what they decide deserves it. And they do this not with arrogance or coldness, but with the quiet, settled certainty of someone who has stopped requiring the outside world's permission to feel like they are on the right path. That quality, unhurried, undeflectable, completely unperformative self-direction, is the most unchallengeable thing a person can embody, because it is not a response to anyone. It is simply who they are. And what you simply are cannot be argued with. The most important thing I can tell you about this law, and about all 7 of them, if I am being honest, is that none of it requires you to become someone different. The version of you that operates from these principles is not more disciplined, more detached, or more strategic than you currently are. It is simply more returned to itself. Less organized around managing other people's perceptions, less organized around answering every demand that arrives, less organized around proving something to people who were never the right audience for the proof. The work is not addition. It is subtraction. It is the patient, cumulative removal of everything that has been running in the background, every automatic response, every reflexive defense, every inherited belief about what strength requires, until what remains is someone who moves through the world from their own center. Not because they decided to be powerful, but because they stopped spending their power on things that were never worth it. One final thing about competition and comparison, because this is where most people quietly lose years of their lives without realizing it. There is a particular kind of suffering that has no obvious name, but that almost everyone who is building something experiences. The suffering of watching someone else succeed at something you wanted. Of seeing someone move forward in a direction you believed was yours. Of feeling, in the presence of their progress, that the distance between where they are and where you are is somehow information about what is possible for you. It is not information about what is possible for you. It is information about where your attention has been going. The person ahead of you in any field did not get there by tracking where you were. They got there by being so genuinely occupied with what they were building that other people's positioning ceased to be a relevant data point. Their attention was not split between their own work and the monitoring of their competition. It was fully, continuously, sometimes obsessively directed at the thing itself. And that undivided attention, that single-channel focus on the work rather than the race, is what compounded. Not their talent, not their connections, not their timing, though timing matters. The attention, applied consistently, without the drag of comparison, over enough time. You cannot do that work while you are watching someone else do theirs. Choose what you are going to build. Face it. And trust that the most devastating thing you can do to anyone who doubted you, anyone who worked against you, anyone who needed you to stay small, is to simply not stop. Every law in this conversation points to the same underlying shift. Moving from a position where the outside world has automatic access to your interior to a position where that access requires your permission. That shift does not happen in a single decision. It is not produced by information alone, or by the intention to be different, or by the insight that you have been operating in a way that costs more than it returns. It is built in small, private, mostly unwitnessed moments. The moment you do not reach for the phone. The moment you feel the pull toward explanation and let it pass. The moment someone says something designed to move you, and you feel the familiar activation beginning, and you let it run without following it. One ordinary moment at a time. The version of you that is genuinely untouchable is not the result of more information or more discipline. It is not a future version of yourself that you have not yet earned. It is what remains when you stop spending your most valuable resource on things that were never worth it. The next time something arrives in your life asking for your reaction, a comment, a silence, a provocation, a request that you explain yourself to someone who was not honestly asking, pause long enough to ask one question. Does this deserve access to me? Because every time you answer that question honestly and act accordingly, you are not just protecting your energy in the moment. You are building something, a version of yourself that other people feel before you open your mouth, that moves through difficult situations without being moved by them, that other people sense without being able to explain exactly why is operating from somewhere they cannot reach. That is where this is headed. Go build it.